Where are we today, Phil? And what happened here?
Plymstock Church. In 1645, June the 7th, there was a Royalist camp around this churchyard. A small lookout, 20, 30 people, soldiers mainly, a couple of women hangers-oners and servants. But this was a Royalist camp dotted around this church. And on this day, June the 7th, 1645, a detachment from Plymouth cavalry under a man named Lieutenant Hunt Greenwood and two captains, John Treacy and Captain Wooten, were ferried across from Plymouth to Mountbatten, what is today Mountbatten. It was called House Sturt in those days. Ferried across with their horses, and this troop of horse moved up towards the old abandoned Fort Stamford, moved on towards Burrow Hill, which was an old Royalist fort, abandoned, down by Radford House. The van of this detachment was a small unit of horse from Captain John St Albans' troop, led by a man called Lieutenant Hunt Greenwood. As he came upon the church, the Royalists were taken completely by surprise. Hunt Greenwood's men attacked the Royalists, scattering the troops in the camp, killing 2 men and capturing a few prisoners. While they were congratulating themselves, they were still waiting for the rest of the party to arrive. A larger force of Royalist cavalry appeared and counterattacked Hunt Greenwood. He was forced to withdraw back on the main body, and the whole unit went back towards Burrow Hill, which was called the Plymstock work in those days. A massive work which had been levelled, it had been abandoned by the Royalists, because at this time of the war, June 1645, a lot of Royalist troops were detached to other armies, so there were insufficient troops to man every outpost around Plymouth. So they withdrew to the safety, or what they thought was the safety, of Plymstock Church. The Royalists, like I said, counterattacked, pushed Hunt Greenwood back towards Plymstock work. They made a determined effort to stop the pursuit, but Hunt Greenwood broke and fled, and the other 2 companies under Captain John Treacy and Captain Wooten were forced to flee with them. They went back towards the boats down at House Sturt, and there were about 40 of the Roundhead cavalry were captured in the encounter, and several men were killed. So the survivors went back to the boats. They paid boatmen 16 shillings to be ferried back and forth across the toward Catwater back towards Plymouth. Now that wasn't the end of the story, because when they got back to Plymouth, one of the captains, John Treacy, was accused of the blunder. He was blamed for the fiasco here, and they didn't listen to him. So to clear his name, he asked to be sent to London, to the House of Commons, to Parliament, to explain, to give his side of the story. He was allowed to go to London. He waited a week hanging around Westminster to be allowed to go in and state his case. And in the end, he got so fed up with it, so he said to the prosecutors, I believe by delaying my case, you're damaging my reputation, my defence. With that, he went in, they found him not guilty, and Captain Treacy was released and sent back to Plymouth. And that was the end of this incident.
And all this happened in this very quiet...
Yes, this little churchyard here, around this churchyard and around Burrow Hill.
So Burrow Hill is...
it's the high ground.
Would you say it's that way?
That way. It's the high ground. It's the highest point in Plymstock, yes, where a Royalist works.
And Mountbatten would be more...
beyond it to the right.
This way here.
Yeah. Incidentally, John Harris, the owner of Radford House, married Elizabeth Champernoun in this church in 1637, July 26th. The Champernowns were another Royalist family in Devon. Had a big mansion at Modbury that was destroyed in the Civil War by the Roundheads. Sir Henry Champernoun, they were a big family. Sir Henry Champernoun was colonel under Sir Richard Grenville later in the Civil War. John Harris of Radford House, he was a Royalist, but he didn't take an active part in the Civil War. Just another couple of little stories.
It's hard to imagine such a violent action occurring here.
It was violent, but it was quick. A lot of shouting, a lot of clashing of swords, pistol shots, and then it was over. So it doesn't seem a lot. Every little corner around Plymouth, there's something to do with the Civil War. Yeah. It was this kind of scene because it was June. It was a hot summer's day, probably, and the men were just not expecting this to happen when they were hit. But they recovered, and there must have been another Royalist force very close by, either coming back from a reconnaissance or whatever, or bringing supplies in. That counter-attacked the Roundhead detachment. It's one of the few defeats of the Roundhead suffered during that summer in Plymouth.
The encampment here was tented.
Tented encampment, yeah. Because it was summer, so it would be hot, so most of them probably slept outside.
So when they attacked, they came on horseback?
Yep.
So would they have attempted to ride through the
Yeah, they ride through the Royalist forces and just slashing and shooting away. But like I said, it was by the time they were sat there congratulating themselves, the other Royalist force came upon them and surprised them.
But we don't know where they came from, the other Royalists.
No, it was somewhere in this area.
But it can't be far.
No, they might have heard the shots and then just rode towards the sound of battle.
So when the Roundheads left, they really left at speed?
Yes, they were. Captain Greenwood tried to withdraw in an orderly fashion, but he was outnumbered, and then he just fled. I don't think he was a great commander, Lieutenant Greenwood, because he led the retreat from Plymstock work as well. He was the one but they blamed another captain for the retreat.
So would the King's men have followed them all the way down to Worcester?
No, I think after the Plymstock work, I think they gave up because they don't know what's behind them. There could be another force. They'd run into two forces: the force here and the other two captains who were a short distance behind. Hunt Greenwood came on ahead of the detachment with the vanguard. When he was defeated, he fell back on the main body, and they thought maybe the Royalists thought, well, towards Stamford, we're getting towards enemy country.
It's interesting to think what sort of boat they'd have used to come across.
Yes, flat boats like some kind of, or a small sloop, or a barge, because there were 4 men paid 16 shillings for conveying the
16
soldiers.
shillings each?
No, 16 shillings for the lot.
Right,
so 4 shillings a piece for bringing the soldiers back and forward, and their horses.
How many horses do you think there were?
Maybe 60 max. 60 maximum. There weren't a lot of horses around Plymouth.
Boat, isn't it?
Yeah, if that many, because Plymouth was always short of horses, because the main armies commandeered horses. They had to go. They were there. When you read the accounts, you read about detachments going out bringing in horses, replacement horses for the cavalry units. We only had a few cavalry units in Plymouth, but they were important for scouting and going out making raids like this one. There could have been 30 or 40 troops because there were 2 captains and a lieutenant. So you had 2 captains and a couple of lieutenants, and maybe 60 troopers maximum, probably closer to 40. Because like you say, to bring those over in a boat, it's a lot of horses. And they met up with a bigger detachment of Royalist horse, but they weren't that big. Maybe the similar kind of number, but because of the surprise, they weren't sure who was behind them.
Phil, thank you once again for an amazing story that is so local to where we live today.
Well, like I said, everywhere you look in Plymouth, something happened in the Civil War.
Thank you very much, Phil.
My pleasure.